You're watching Q&A live from Jakarta. Our next question is from Nicholas Hughes.
Indonesia's annoyance at Australia's suspension of the live cattle trade has led to Indonesia implementing a policy of self-sufficiency in beef production. In my view, this policy is clearly unsustainable, as we're seeing with rising beef prices and reportedly farmers selling their breeding stock for slaughter. Australian investment in Indonesia's domestic cattle industry would be problematic. A better business model could be for Indonesians to invest in cattle stations in the top end of Australia. How can we encourage politicians in both Australia and Indonesia to focus on longer-term trade and investment relationships?
David, can I start with you? And we just reflect on the fact that the Indonesian ambassador to Australia has been travelling around the north to cattle stations in recent days, and there's great hope starting to slowly unfold that there may be some end to this impasse over the live cattle trade. Do you think there will be?
Well, I'm always afraid that I'll be asked about the beef, although I'm not an expert about that. The beef issue is very sensitive in Indonesia at the moment, as you know, but it's more a corruption issue rather than this embargo. Though I realize, and as a consumer, as a housewife, we're all very complaining about the high price of Indonesian beef now. It's as if we are all eating Wagyu. Rendang is getting to be the most costly food in the world. But the questions about import is, as you know, very sensitive in Indonesia. It is always a debate about whether it's food security or food sovereignty. One could argue that we should be talking about food security in which an element of greater self-reliance is important, because for a country as big as Indonesia, it is also not very wise to be totally dependent on outsiders, which could be affected by problems of trade, foreign exchange, and other disruptions. So Indonesia needs also to be able to grow its own food as much as possible. But of course, the shortfall should be made based on import to ensure that the right of the consumers, the food security is ensured. So in terms of national policy, the desire to develop an Indonesian beef industry, to grow our own live cattle, is important. And Indonesia is big enough. The eastern part of Indonesia has, I think, sufficient land where we can grow the cattle. And here we hope that we can have a win-win solution with Australia.
So just on this issue, though, very briefly, do you think we'll see a resolution to this issue? The quotas were cut hugely after the suspension of trade by the Australian government. And that was a pretext, in a way, for certain people in your agricultural ministry to move into this self-sufficiency area. But do you think it'll come back again?
You know, this is tongue-in-cheek. Very few people think about policy in Ministry of Agriculture at the moment. So they have other interesting things happening there. So I don't hold your breath that any decisive policy would be taken.
Okay, I'm just going to see a lot of Australians will
with that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it's realistic for Indonesia to be self-sufficient in terms of our beef production in the near future. So we have to find a solution that will be beneficial for both countries. I think given the geographical conditions of Indonesia, it's much costly to raise cattle here than in Australia, for example, because you have to feed the cattle here. Well, whereas in Australia, you can just let them loose, you know, in all these plains. So, just like Australians in Bali, you know, you let them loose. I think the best ways, I mean, the issue is more than just beef, but it's also about national pride. You know, self-sufficiency is about national pride. It's about food security issues and all that. So why don't we just take the approach of building a Toyota of beef? You know, it's a Japanese import, it's Japanese production, but it's a production line is everywhere in so many different countries, but it's still a Japanese company.
Well, I think that does get to the point the questioner was saying, that perhaps investment from Indonesia in the Northern Territory and other parts of Australia might work. But I'm just going to go to Tim. This is slightly mysterious, I'm sure, for a lot of Australians, what we were talking about with the Agriculture Department, what David was saying. But of course, what we know is the Agriculture Department is under the control of one party, an Islamist party, the PKS, a very large party with very few members in the actual parliament. How did that happen, and how does that change the equation?
Well, that ministry has been really used, and this has become quite clear in a major corruption scandal in Indonesia, as a money-raising exercise where essentially beef quotas are being auctioned off for corrupt benefit. And this has led to a series of trials that are absolutely front page in Indonesian newspapers the way Australian issues never are. So this party PKS, which was an electoral wonder child at the last elections, has since experienced a whole range of corruption scandals, including the beef about beef, and it's now polling at around less than 3%. So it's pretty much destroyed itself over this issue. That's what the in-jokes tonight have been about. So the problem for Australia in dealing with this is that what we see as essentially a domestic issue about animal cruelty is, in the Indonesian context, about some very difficult issues about politics, about how corruption operates within ministries, and of course, most importantly, the forthcoming elections next year, with the first presidential election in July, second round in September. So there's going to be this huge changeover of power, and what's been going on with these parties has an impact on the beef policy with Australia, but we don't see it that way.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you there because you've forecast what's in our next question. So you're watching a special edition of Q&A live in Jakarta. Audience is 50% Indonesian, 50% Australian. Our next question